Is there a book that you read and that had a profound impact on the way you started to think and act? This episode is about such a story. One day someone comes across an ancient text that not many people have heard of. She reads it and her thinking and her life starts to shift. I love to share this book story with you. Welcome back to Bold Books and Bones. The story starts with this fine lady. I met her in the beautiful botanic garden of Meissen, just north of Brussels. Her name is Anne van Zevenand. She has a PhD in philosophy and she's the author of 18 books on philosophy, published in French, English, Dutch and Italian. Also, she wrote this thoughtful book called Thus Replied Zarathustra, in which she talks about an ancient song that started a thinking and research journey in her mind. And this journey ultimately changed the way she looks at life. Now, what's so remarkable is that these songs that contain ancient thoughts and that sparked this change in her mind are at least 30 centuries old. And this is what happened.
Well, yes, in 2002 there was a Zoroastrian center in Brussels. It doesn't exist anymore, but there were evenings of Persian poetry, and this is where I heard people speaking of these hymns, because these are not texts. We should say this is an oral tradition that has been transmitted from one generation to the other generation, dating back to 1700, 1500, between in that period before Christ, BC, as we say.
So these hymns or songs are called the Gathas, which are ascribed to Zarathustra or Zoroaster, as he is called in Greek. We learn from Anne's book that Zarathustra is a prophet who lived in an area that we now call Iran or Persia. There is not really a scholarly consensus on when exactly Zarathustra lived. The estimations vary between the 2nd century BC all the way back to the 6th century BC. And as Anne already mentioned, the written version of the thinking of Zarathustra is probably somewhere from the 2nd century BC. Therefore, many scholars indicate that the Zoroastrian belief and philosophy predates our Jewish, Greeks, Christian and Islamic traditions, and has also influenced some of these traditions. Now, the Gathas are a part of the Avesta, which is a primary collection of thoughts belonging to the Zoroastrian religion, a bit in the same way as the New and Old Testament are an important collection of books for the Christians. And this is what Anne has to say about this.
Gathas, so these are the hymns. There are only a small part of the Avesta, and you see, this is the book that has been brought to Europe. They called it, the book of Zarathustra, but only this small part is written in an older dialect. And it is only that part that we call the Gathas, literally songs, hymns, and these are attributed to Zarathustra Spitama. I should say Zarathustra Spitama, to be correct.
So these Gathas consist of 17 hymns, containing only about 6,000 words. So it is a rather short text, but this is where it becomes particularly interesting. Because Anne came across the English translation of the Avesta, and although she didn't know about this book before, to her surprise, she recognized some of the statements and thoughts that came directly from this ancient book. And this is what she experienced.
So these are, they have been translated in English, and I heard the translations in English. There are many. There are at least 7, 8, 9 translations in English. And I heard elements that it was like, hearing the Greek philosopher Plato, Pythagoras, Heraclitus. And I said, well, this is strange. How is it possible that 15 centuries, no, let's be exact, 12 centuries before those great Greek philosophers, how is it possible that there are thoughts that have already been thought, been transmitted to the community, and that we don't know of them? So I never heard of the Zarathustra, the Persian Zarathustra, who was, the prophet of Zoroastrianism. So I thought, I literally heard some sentences that you can read in Plato and Pythagoras, and this was really striking to me, and that's how my whole research began.
Honestly, I also never heard about this Persian man. I think it's fair to say that in general, in Europe, we learn about the ancient Greek civilization and how it has without any doubt significantly influenced our modern way of thinking about science, philosophy, politics, and art. But of course, there must have been something before them. Other and older civilizations have existed, and they must have influenced the Greek and other communities. I don't know about you, but I can't recall that this was ever mentioned during the history lessons I took in school. And I think it's also fair to say that in general, the texts like the Avesta and the Gathas are not that well known in Europe. What is particularly striking is that the thinking of Zarathustra has apparently influenced the thinking of great minds like Plato, Pythagoras, and others. Now, a few words about the Gathas. These original thoughts have been pronounced in a dead language and have been translated in modern languages. And translating it is not an easy task. If you're interested to learn more about it, I leave a link to a website where you can find more background information about the Gathas. I tried to read a translation myself. This one is written by Jacques Duchesne-Guillemin, and although he provides an insightful introduction, the text is just too foreign to me. The same with some of the translations that I found online. I think I just have too little context and knowledge about the Zoroastrian thinking and culture to say with confidence that I understand what is written. And that is why Anne's book was so important to me. Her interpretation of the text kept my interest alive, and I was curious to learn more. So, back to Anne's story. I met Anne for the first time during a lecture that she gave to a cultural and philosophical organization. I was intrigued by what she had to say, so I started to read her book a few days later. And by reading the following passages in her introduction, I was hooked. She describes the opening scene of the ancient Gathas. It goes something like this. There are 4 extraordinary characters or manifestations who are summoning each other. These characters are the soul of Mother Earth, self-regulation, good thinking, and infinite wisdom. Now, think about a theatrical and dramatic scene, and let me read this intriguing part to you from Anne's book. Here we go. Mother Earth is complaining, and she says, "Why did you create me? Who made me this way?" She rebels against the destructive power of humans. I am oppressed by anger, cruelty, and aggression. This primal scream is answered by infinite wisdom, the creator of Mother Earth, who in turn puts questions to cosmic self-regulation. Who can be her savior? How may we bring comfort to her soul, offering protection, against the followers of deceit. Then this intense dialogue between these four manifestations continues. And in these powerful lines, we read that after the soul of Mother Earth cries for help because she is mistreated by humans, a human is appointed to bring us, the other humans, on the right path and away from leaders who deceive us. Next, a bit further in this song, this human is called Zarathustra. He takes up his role and calls upon us to listen to our inner voice, which is the greatest of all voices. So taking care of Mother Earth, taking care of our planet, being aware of leaders who deceive us and getting in touch and listening to our inner voice sounds so modern, or better, timeless, but it has been pronounced by Zarathustra 30 centuries ago. So what Anne did for several years was working with these ancient thoughts, researching this text, connecting with people from the Zoroastrian community, and even traveling to India and to Iran. And starting from all that, she made an interpretation of this ancient text into a language that can be understood by contemporary people like us. In my personal opinion, when scholars manage to explain something that is complex or ancient to a much broader audience, so that people like you and me can understand it and learn from it, then their research truly becomes meaningful and impactful, because then it reaches and informs an audience outside of the academic world. Now, another thing that Anne did is the following. She explained me that the Gathas have been carefully conserved for centuries by the Zoroastrian communities in India, where they were discovered by European scholars in the 18th century. And they were first translated into French and then later into English. But Anne re-evaluates some of these translations. For example, where in the translations they talked about good versus bad, her reading of this translation was different. And she pointed out that truth versus untruth comes much closer to the original meaning. So she made a bold decision to use all her knowledge from years of research about the subject to retranslate some of the words, which resulted in some fascinating implications for this text. And I think it makes this ancient text from a philosophical perspective much more accessible to people of this century. It makes me at least curious to learn more about the Zoroastrian way of thinking.
So in these Gathas you have, I would say, 2-3 important philosophical ideas. And one is the idea of free choice. We choose. Now you could say, yes, of course, free choice is between good and bad. While you remember what we said about translating in true and untrue, there are two tendencies inside us. And one is, a tendency towards trueness, telling the truth, being true to yourself and so on. And there is the opposite tendency towards, being untrue, even to deceive, to be untruthful. For example, you promise something and then you don't do it. These two tendencies live inside each one of us, and they are the motor of what I would call the choice that we make every day in our speaking, thinking, and acting.
This is such a simple but powerful concept that every human could apply to him or herself right away. It is a triangle of good thinking, good speaking, and good acting. Anne calls it in her book the Tripartite Motto. So, whatever life throws at us, we can choose to bring consistency in this triangle. For example, I could think that people can have great skills regardless of their ethnic background. I speak my mind about this while talking with people in my community, and I can choose to act on it by bringing the best people I can find to my company regardless of their ethnic background. This would be a triangle that is consistent. While another example could be that I think driving cars contributes significantly to the air pollution. I confirm this thinking verbally when I'm asked about it. However, I don't act on it because I don't buy an electrical car even if I could afford it. This would be a triangle that is not consistent, and so on. I think that living our lives while trying to bring consistency between our thinking, speaking and acting would help us to have a more balanced life, and it certainly would help us to bring peace of mind. It would let us pay attention to what enters our minds. We would then deliberately ask ourselves what is truth and what is untruth. Especially in an age where we have an overload of information that is thrown at us, this is quite relevant. Next, we would be very conscious of what we say and how we say it. And then we would evaluate if our actions are in line with our thinking and our speaking. So the triangle would help us to pay attention to our inner inconsistencies, which I'm sure all of us have at some times. It is fair to say, I think, that keeping that triangle of good thinking, good speaking and good acting consistent in every situation is extremely difficult. But I think it is worth trying. As Anne points out in her book, the work of Zarathustra invites us to make thinking, speaking and acting correspond with each other and become a rule of life. And to me, the beauty of it is that this 30 centuries old concept created by our human ancestors is still relevant to our current times. This is why I find Anne's book so intriguing and original. Instead of publishing another translation, which her book is not, she uses her skills as a philosopher to introduce these ancient thoughts to us. The Avesta and the Gathas have influenced numerous generations for centuries, and it has influenced people far beyond the Zarathustrian community, sometimes without them being conscious about it. And Anne continues this tradition with her book. She awakens once more these ancient thoughts of self-evaluation, of how to respect Mother Nature, how to detect deception in others and in ourselves, and how each one of us can make personal choices in this regard. But there is another thing that is different about her book. Normally, when I read a philosophical book, the writer shares his or her ideas in a rather detached way. He or she describes, for example, the thoughts and the reasoning of an important thinker from the past, and they maybe even share their personal perspective on that. In Anne's case, something different happened, because the Gathas have truly influenced her way of thinking. She is definitely not detached anymore from her subject of study. And this is how she explains it in her own words.
Yes, there is a kind of enthusiasm that has, it's like a sparkle of light that has been, to use this metaphor of the light, I have been touched by something that I would call maybe the essence of humankind. That is so philosophical when I say this, but because it is of all people of all times, and it is something that, you just cannot see it as a solution to your problems. We are used to, quick solutions, and the answer will, in a passive way, or we are passive, or we are trying to be mindful, and things become a medium to an end. Here it is rather, choosing to put this tripartite motto, choosing to put that at the center of your existence, and then we need to add one element, and that is the primordial choice. So it is not just choosing between I will do this, not that, I will eat this and not that. No. I think there is a choice that is anterior to those daily choices, and that would be that you try to be more true, so that you give preference to the tendency towards trueness. You actually, how can I say this? You cultivate a resistance to untrueness. And what is most important, that is that you don't point a finger to someone else. So it really starts each one with himself.
Cultivating a resistance to untruthness and not to point a finger to someone else. I think that this is what we need in these times of misinformation and disinformation. Now, if you would like to discover the thinking of Zarathustra through the mind, words and actions of Anne, then Anne is so kind to send her book signed and free of charge to maximum 10 people who share their reason why they would want to read this book. Just a few sentences would be enough. So it's easy. Just leave your reasons underneath this episode on YouTube or direct message me on the Bold Books and Bones Instagram page. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you next time. Meanwhile, maybe try to be conscious to align your thinking, speaking, and acting. And of course, stay curious and stay free. Bye for now.